Yo, what's up, YouTube? So I realized that I don't have a video in English about me kind of detailing my entire Spanish journey up until this point. A lot of my progress updates, if not all of them, have been in Spanish, and I realized that the people who could probably benefit most from them might not be able to understand them. So today's video, we're just going to be going through. A while back, I did a write-up on Reddit, on the Dreaming Spanish subreddit, kind of going into detail about my entire journey. This is going to be kind of like a video version. I am going to add some extra stuff that I didn't put in that write-up. But if you're interested in just reading through that real quick, I'll put the link in the description of this video. Otherwise, I'm going to split this up into a few different categories. And then at the end of the video, I'll have like a little Q&A section of questions that I received from people in the Dreaming Spanish Discord server. So we're going to start with my background. I took 3 years of Spanish in high school, and from 2015 to 2018. And then I took 2 semesters of beginner level Spanish in college. One in spring of 2020 and one in fall of 2022. So before my final semester of Spanish and Dreaming Spanish, I couldn't conjugate anything. I was so bad. Literally in high school, I was like, my teacher had to sit me next to the kids that actually knew what they were doing, because I did not know what was going on or what was being said in class. And I could really only conjugate the present tense, and I couldn't really understand anything. I started using the Refold ES1K Anki deck sporadically in mid-September 2021. And I started getting more consistent with it in summer of 2022. Yeah, and I ended up finishing it in mid-October of that same year. And then I started using Dreaming Spanish 2 weeks before my final Spanish class. I figured it would I discovered it a little bit earlier on, but I never used it. And, I figured it might be good prep for that class. And then about, let's say like a month or two into the semester, I realized I was learning words from the Dreaming Spanish videos that weren't in my vocab deck. And so just like a quick, explanation of what Dreaming Spanish is, because I totally forgot to mention that. Dreaming Spanish is a kind of YouTube channel that has their own platform. They focus on teaching through comprehensible input. Essentially, they have a bunch of videos all the way from super beginner to advanced. And the idea is, as long as you can understand the gist of what's going on, you're fine. Your brain will just figure everything out over time. You don't really need to study grammar. You don't need to study vocabulary. You just need to immerse in the language and focus, like pay attention to what you're watching, right? When I discovered it, I was like, oh, that's easy enough. Everything else hasn't really worked for me. So, I'll give it a shot. Why not? So I did that. And then Refold is a website or like a group that has a kind of like learning guide as well. That's very similar to Dreaming Spanish. It's immersion based. They just recommend doing a little bit of grammar and vocabulary review to make native content as accessible as early as possible. So I usually recommend Refold for languages that don't have content like Dreaming Spanish. So my thoughts on Dreaming Spanish and comprehensible input. It works. They work. Like I just said, I was picking up words that weren't even in like my vocab decks and stuff. And I was just like, oh, let's go, let's do this. And Dreaming Spanish thankfully has a roadmap with like different levels and hour counts, right? So like X amount of hours, you'll roughly be able to do X, Y, Z. In my experience, the roadmap was pretty accurate. And it helped like give me concrete goals to aim for and like reassurance that, okay, I just need to get to this amount of hours and I'll more or less be able to do this. Whereas before I had encountered Dreaming Spanish and all of this, I was kind of just, I guess, wandering in the dark. That's like kind of the best way I can explain it, right? Like I had never learned a language before, so I didn't really know what to expect. So this was definitely helpful. I mentioned this in my Portuguese update that I just did, that Dreaming Spanish recommends that if you already know a Romance language and you're learning another one, that it's probably going to take you about half the time to learn that language than what the roadmap says, which I feel like is pretty accurate so far, given my experience learning Portuguese. If you guys are interested in that, go check out that video as well. So this whole like just sit back and watch method, super easy to stick to. And ultimately at the end of the day, whatever method you use, the one that you stick to the most and that you're consistent with is going to be the most effective for you. I will say though, listening is key to language learning. If you do decide to do grammar and vocabulary review, make sure you're listening, like at least 70% of the time you spend learning the language is spent listening to it. I always say that listening to the language is kind of like the glue that makes everything that you're actively learning stick together. So grammar and vocabulary review should really only be to prime you to notice those things when you are immersing. Grammar review is not necessary in this process, but it likely helps a bit in the beginning. And I think it's probably more useful at an advanced level. I studied a little bit of grammar in my class. And I know other learners who have, taken a more traditional route, studied grammar and like taken classes and all that. And they speak excellently. I always point to Mr. Barron, who speaks amazing Spanish, sounds like a native Venezuelan. And then Bilingue Blogs, I think, is another really good example. Those guys sound great. I mean, it's going to take years to reach their level, but this is a lifelong journey. So if I can even get to like a fraction of, as good as they are within a couple years, I'll be happy. So I think my current plan is to kind of like review lightly, like certain grammar points. Like maybe if I can just find like a grammar series on YouTube about Spanish grammar in Spanish, then I'll just like watch a video a day or something. When I started outputting, and when I say outputting, I mean like speaking, writing, stuff like that. I did go through Español con Juan's grammar videos, and I did do a little bit of grammar review with my tutors. I felt that Juan's videos in particular really helped with understanding the subjunctive. He kind of teaches it through funny little skits, and some of the parts are like so dumb that you're not going to forget it. So that would be my recommendation, is just, if you're interested, do a little bit of light grammar review once you're ready to start speaking. And if you really like grammar, maybe do a little bit at the beginning. But yeah, it is not necessary. I think Anki helped as well. I should probably mention that Anki is a spaced repetition flashcard system. So basically it uses an algorithm to show you the flashcards that's like essentially right before you forget them. That way you don't have, like, you learn them better and you do less reviews. The ES1K deck I did from Refold was just kind of like the 1,000 most common words. And they had like audio examples, or audio clips, example sentences, stuff like that. So it was very well done. I would recommend that deck if you are interested in that. Now, I have meticulously tracked everything I've done up until this point. I currently have 2,100 hours of Spanish, and the majority of that well, I guess I'll just go from top to bottom. We have Dreaming Spanish. I have done 546 hours. This is all rounding down because I got the decimal points here. But I've got 546 hours of Dreaming Spanish, 527 hours of podcasts, 418 hours of anime, 243 hours of speaking practice, 129 hours of YouTube, 103 hours of TV. So like that's like live action stuff like telenovelas. And then I have 55 hours of Worlds of Cross lessons. I'll get into Worlds of Cross in a little bit, but essentially it's just kind of like the parts of my tutoring sessions that I did where I felt like I wasn't really speaking. I was just kind of more so being lectured, or like we were watching a video, or, you know, working on some other task. And then I have done about 43 hours of voice rooms, 30 hours of Crosstalk. I will say with Crosstalk though, I have done more than 30 hours. It's just I don't usually track it. What happens is I usually just hop in the Dreaming Spanish Discord or the Mr. Salas Discord and do Crosstalk in there just for fun. Once I've kind of watched everything that I want to watch for the day. And I don't really bother tracking it. And then I've watched 1 hour of movies. Almost 2 hours. But yeah, I haven't really been a big movie guy. I just prefer to like watch kind of like shorter things so I can kind of spread my input throughout the day, or just kind of whenever I feel like it. And then in addition to my 2,100 hours of Spanish, I have an additional 77 hours of Anki review. So 77 hours doing vocabulary flashcards, essentially. With Crosstalk, I did not do much of it until after hitting 1,000 hours of input. In the beginning, I was a little bit concerned that, you know, 1 hour of watching, because when you're doing Crosstalk, right, ideally half of that is you speaking English or whatever language the other person wants to learn that you know. Okay, let me just explain what Crosstalk is briefly. Crosstalk, for example, in my case, I would speak English. It's a type of language exchange where I would speak English and the other person would speak Spanish. That way we can both get input in our target languages without having to worry about how to output and how to say certain things. And you can kind of tailor the level of your speech to the other person's level to make things a lot more understandable for them. In the beginning, you can use whiteboards, pictures, drawings, stuff like that to make everything a little bit more understandable. But yeah, I didn't really do much at first because I was like, oh, well, if I'm only like really listening to Spanish half of that time, it's not, you know, why not just watch an hour of Dreaming Spanish videos? That would probably be more effective. I have changed my opinion about that after, you know, being in the community quite a while and interviewing Austin on my channel about his experience doing like 500 hours of Crosstalk. I've realized that it is very effective. Pablo, the founder of Dreaming Spanish, always says that Crosstalk is the most effective way to learn. And I would tend to agree with that. Mostly because like you're actively communicating with someone, so you need to be paying attention, and focus is essential to learning new stuff, especially as we age. The older we get, the more we have to focus to maintain that mental plasticity. But I would recommend, you know, if you're looking for Crosstalk partners, just hop on the Dreaming Spanish Discord, hop on the Mr. Salas Discord, or try your luck on Hello Talk or Tandem. Personally, I prefer Hello Talk. I feel like the ads are less intrusive. But I would definitely recommend giving it a shot. Let's see. The next section here is podcasts. So my top podcast early on was Español con Juan. You know, I really like his stuff. It's kind of like an old guy at a bar telling stories type of vibe. Really comedic. Even my mom, who's a native Spanish speaker, kind of likes his stuff. After that, I listened to Charlas Hispanas, but only Fredo's episodes, because Fredo is like their Mexican guide. And I was really only interested in Mexican Spanish at the time. After that, I transitioned to native podcasts. I listen to a lot of Siempre Hay Flores, which is done by Daniela Guerrera, I believe. I might have messed up the last name, but just look up Siempre Hay Flores. Awesome kind of like podcast about kind of like self-improvement topics, psychology, stuff like that. But I think her podcast is very easy to understand, relatively speaking. And so I listened to that for a while. And then after hitting 1,000 hours, I started listening to Leyendas Legendarias and El Dojo. Both podcasts are comedy podcasts that talk about historical events and stuff like that, done by the same guys. Siempre Hay Flores and Leyendas Legendarias and El Dojo are all Mexican podcasts. If you haven't noticed already, that's kind of been my focus in terms of like region and dialect and all that. Now with anime, I highly recommend it. Not only just is it like a really like the medium that I particularly like, but I feel like the dubs are a perfect bridge between learner content and live action shows or other hard content. Dubs tend to be a little bit easier to understand, just because like the voices are very clear. I don't like live action dubs because the lips don't quite match up with the sounds, but that's not an issue with anime. I started with One Punch Man, and then after that I moved on to My Hero Academia and Black Clover. My Hero Academia and Black Clover both have a ton of content. I think both of them easily have like over 100 or I don't know about My Hero Academia, but I think Black Clover has about 170 episodes or something like that. So it's a lot. You get used to the characters' voices over time, and it'll get easier to understand them as well. As far as telenovelas go, I haven't watched many. I watched the first season of La Casa de las Flores, and then I didn't watch the remainder of it because I just didn't like it. But then Afro, who's another kind of like refold Spanish learner, YouTube creator, highly recommended to me Silvana Sin Lana. And I loved that show. It also has a ton of content about roughly 100 hours of telenovelas that I've done. It was essentially all from that show. I would highly recommend it. You can find it for free on, I believe, NBC's website. If you're here in the US, I think if you're outside of that, you might need to use a VPN. But I'd highly recommend checking it out. It's kind of like a comedy, like more family vibe type of show. You still get like all the typical telenovela like flares and twists to it, to the story. But I don't know. I found it like a little bit more wholesome. Whereas like with La Casa de las Flores, I felt like everyone was just an awful person. Everyone was cheating on everyone. It was terrible, man. Like, but yeah, as far as conversation practice goes, I started speaking at 1,000 hours. So I did not speak Spanish at all until hitting 1,000 hours of input. I didn't have any reason to start earlier. The Dreaming Spanish Roadmap recommends waiting until at least 600 hours of input to begin speaking and reading, ideally 1,000 hours. And so I just waited until 1,000 hours to do that. So when I did start to speak, I tried using Tandem and HelloTalk. I would just create a voice room and put, just trying to practice my Spanish. And then I would raise they have like kind of like stages is what they call them. So I would like invite the first person who joins up, and we would do kind of just a one-on-one conversation in there. But I got tired of like repeatedly introducing myself and talking about the same topics all the time. So I stopped for about a month or two. And then I signed up for Worlds Across. Worlds Across is a subscription-based Spanish tutoring platform. And so just for transparency's sake, I am an affiliate for Worlds Across. I have a referral code. My referral code is Neon, like the name of this channel. You'll get 30% off your first month if you sign up for using my code. and I will receive a commission if you use my code. So I just want to be completely transparent there. But I was using their service long before I became an affiliate. And I had a really good experience with all their tutors and everything. But essentially, like, you can book same day classes just a few hours in advance. They have a couple plans. They have a free tier. You get one free class a month just to kind of try it. They have a 10 class per month tier that's like 130 USD, and then an unlimited plan for 199 USD. I did the unlimited plan because I got a discount for I believe it was their New Year's sale. And so I just did that for a while. And they also offer like unlimited group classes. And I did those with other Dreaming Spanish users that from the Discord that were also taking classes with Worlds Across, just for fun. And so I did the unlimited plan for about 4 months. I started with 90-minute classes every single day. And then I transitioned to just 60-minute classes because I noticed that I was getting a little bit antsy. And like, I kind of wanted to do something else after that 1 hour mark. It wasn't anything to do with the tutors. It was just me personally. I think my brain was kind of like getting a little bit, tired of speaking for so long in Spanish as well. So 60 minutes was definitely like the perfect length for me. And then after those 4 months of unlimited, I bought their 3-month bundle for their anniversary sale, which was about 45 classes at the time. And so that's where I got the majority of my speaking practice done. Most of that was done with Venezuelan tutors, because Argentinian and Venezuelan tutors are like the majority on the platform. But I don't think that necessarily had an effect on my accent or anything. At the end of the day, the group you identify with most and the group or like the region that you listen to the most is going to be what affects your accent the most. And so because I strongly identify with like Mexico and like my Mexican family, I was not affected by speaking with people from other regions for so long. Refold says that at 50 hours, people tend to get more comfortable with speaking. At 100 hours, this is hours of output. So 50 hours of output, they tend to get more comfortable at speaking. 100 hours, quite comfortable. And 200 hours, it's, quote, like no problem at all. I would say that's relatively accurate as well. And I definitely noticed that about 160 hours of output, I started having more conversations where I would walk away afterwards and be like, that was a really good conversation. Like I did good that time. But there was definitely a lot of times where I felt like I was somehow regressing. But ultimately, as long as you keep being consistent with it, you're going to get better. It's just a feeling that you're not doing as well. So don't worry about that. As far as YouTube goes, that was essential for me at about 350 hours of input. I started to get a little bit burnt out with Dreaming Spanish because I was doing so much of it every single day. And I really needed some variety in my routine. So I watched a lot of Luisito Comunica and Cocinando Korea. The first channel is kind of like a travel vlogs type of channel. And the second one is a cooking channel. Both of those are relatively easy to understand as far as native content goes. And so I would highly recommend checking those out as well. I know a lot of other people who I've recommended them to really enjoy those as well. And then reading. So I started reading at 1,000 hours. I started with 2 graded readers, and then I read the first Magic Treehouse book. And then I thought to myself, if I don't read something more interesting than this, I'm never going to read. So I looked for easy fiction novels on YouTube, and I found El Príncipe del Sol. It's a Spanish or a Mexican book, or the book written by a Mexican author. Her name is Claudia Ramirez Lomelí, otherwise known as Clau Reads Books on YouTube. I found it surprisingly easy, so I just decided to stick with that. And I am currently on the second book of this series, La Ladrona de la Luna. And, I've been reading the second book for like 6 months. That's how inconsistent I've been with reading. It's not even that big of a book. I think it's like 350 pages, something like that. This past week, I have gotten more consistent. I've been reading a chapter or two every single day. And, I have high hopes for reading. Everyone says reading is very beneficial. So I'm hoping that it's that crucial piece that I was missing to really like polish up my Spanish. As far as major milestones go, at 150 hours, that's when I started listening to podcasts. After I realized I could understand Español con Juan. At 250 to 300 hours was when I realized I could finally understand Luisito Comunica, because before Dreaming Spanish, I tried just listening to anything in like all types of content in Spanish, native content. And I couldn't understand anything. So when I finally revisited Luisito and I could understand it, it was such a nice feeling. And I also visited Spanish-speaking family around that time. And I could follow a 30-minute conversation they had, which was super, super cool. It really gave me a big boost of confidence and reassurance that I was indeed progressing. And it was also about at that point when I started focusing primarily on Mexican Spanish. So like 99% of the time I was listening to content from Mexican creators. In the beginning, I don't really think it's necessary to focus on a particular accent. But, if you have one in mind that you like, after a couple hundred hours, that's when I would recommend focusing on it. Because in the beginning, you just need any type of content that, not only interests you, but is easy enough for you to understand. So you can't really be too picky yet. I know in the future, Dreaming Spanish will probably have a lot more content from creators from different regions in all sorts of content about all sorts of topics. So I'm sure, way down the line, that's not really going to be an issue. But my recommendation is don't worry about that in the beginning. At 440 hours, dubbed anime became accessible. This was awesome. I started watching One Punch Man and My Hero Academia. And I understood them well enough to enjoy them and follow the story. However, I stopped watching them because I thought I'd benefit more from learner-focused content at the time. And so at 611 hours, I know, oddly specific, I revisited My Hero Academia and I found it much easier. So I started incorporating dubbed anime more and more into my routine. At 800 hours, anime became my primary source of input. So I was doing like 2-3 episodes a day, and then just kind of like whatever podcasts or YouTube videos happened to interest me. Or podcast was more like stuff just when I was out and about on the go or doing like chores and stuff like that. But I felt comfortable enough to watch anime I'd never seen before at that time, and I could comprehend everything extremely well. So I stopped watching learner content. There was just really no need for it at that time. At 1,000 hours is when I spoke for the first time. My first ever conversation was 2 hours long. I went into it with zero expectations. And, leading up to 1,000 hours, I was like, dude, there's no way I'm going to be able to speak at all in Spanish. Like I am just so cooked. This is going to be so rough. Which it was. It was extremely rough. And I had to reword things a lot. I kept pausing, getting stuck, but I could convey everything I wanted to say. And that just made me so excited that I couldn't stop talking. So that's why it was a 2-hour conversation. At 1,150 hours, I started reading El Príncipe del Sol, my first young adult novel. And then at 1,450 hours, I read my first nonfiction book, El Ego es el Enemigo by Ryan Holiday. I decided my initial plan was to kind of rotate between fiction and nonfiction. I read this book because I was kind of interested in, psychology and stuff like that. And I also noticed it used usted. So I figured that would be good practice. It was a pretty easy read in terms of like language difficulty. So I would, recommend trying nonfiction as well if it interests you, and if fiction is still a little bit too difficult for you. At 2,050 hours, I went to Spain. That was my first time. Well, technically not my first time. I went to Tijuana when I was a kid, but I don't really remember anything, and I didn't speak Spanish. So this was my first time going to a Spanish-speaking country as a Spanish speaker. And I felt extremely comfortable communicating in Spanish. It was awesome. I had no issues at all. It felt so good to be able to just walk around, talk to anybody I wanted to, ask for things in the store, buy stuff, order at restaurants without any issues. On the plane flight over, I sat next to a guy from Madrid. Awesome dude. Thank God he started speaking to me, because I was not going to speak to him. I was just going to put my headphones on and like get input the entire time. But we had a really good conversation. Awesome guy. We talked a lot about language learning. And so, yeah, just being able to talk to people from the country that I was visiting and get to know them like on a deeper level was very satisfying. I stayed with a friend and his wife when I was in Madrid. And I remember like mid-conversation with his wife, I realized like, this is so cool. I'm getting to see like a more authentic version of her because she's communicating her native language. I forget where I heard this metaphor from. I believe it might've been from Matt versus Japan back in the day, but a lot of times doing things in your second language feels like doing things with a glove on, right? Like you can feel what you're touching, but you're like lacking a little bit of like sensitivity. So it's like not quite the same experience. And so, yeah, it was just really cool. So that was definitely a big motivator for me, to keep improving and to start learning other languages as well. I will say though, that trip, I met a Colombian guy in Barcelona, and it was definitely tough to understand him at times. He texted me some voice notes, and I remember just like replaying them a few times because I was like, huh? What did he say? But, yeah, even at, 2,000 hours of input, there's still going to be people that you struggle to understand just because they either have like a really strong accent, or you're just not quite like used to it yet because you haven't listened to it a ton. I definitely miss things from Spaniards as well, but yeah, generally speaking, you can understand most people without any issues, at 2,000 hours. So I wouldn't, be too worried about occasionally not understanding someone or something. So my future plans for Spanish. I definitely plan to keep tracking my input. I definitely want to keep tracking until at least until 3,000 hours. We'll see. Maybe I stop tracking before then. But really, it's not that difficult for me to track what I do on a day-to-day basis. Like usually it's just I go to my watch history and I just add up everything that's there at the end of the day. And it helps me to make sure that I'm getting like at least like a minimum amount of input per day, especially now that I'm doing Portuguese. I want to make sure that I'm splitting my time pretty evenly, or at least like how I set out to kind of split it. My other goal is to read more. Like I said, I just started being more consistent with reading. I have high hopes for reading, and in 2025, I want to read 3 million additional words. I've currently read about 320,000 words. I know 3 million words is a milestone that's thrown out there quite a bit, as like by the time you read 3 million words, you're not going to have any issues reading at all. I hope so. I definitely skip over like a lot of like comments in Spanish on YouTube and Instagram and stuff like that, because it does take more effort to read them. And I usually just can't be bothered. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. I'm really hoping it like kind of reinforces and like polishes up a lot of like grammar issues that I might still have at this level. Another thing that I want to do is continue to speak about 1 to 3 hours per week. I haven't spoken Spanish since I got back from Spain. Well, I spoke last night. Okay. I definitely feel like I've gotten a little bit rusty. It does come back pretty quickly. But I want to be consistent with it because I feel like not only is that consistency necessary to maintain it at like a high level, so that I can just use it whenever without any issues. But also to like keep improving. I also want to take the C1 exam, the Cepher C1 exam I think it's the Dele exam. That's the one I want to take. I want to take the C1. Actually, no. I forget how it works exactly, but essentially if there's a C1 exam for that, I want to take it. It might just be the one where like you take it and then they assign you a level. Although I might be thinking, no, the SIELE, the CLE one, that's the one you pick a level and no, that's the one you take and then they just assign a level. I don't know. I'm getting mixed up. Either way, I want to take the Dele for the C1 in probably early 2026. I was initially planning on taking it in 2025 in like April. But now that I started learning Portuguese, my time is more split. And so I don't have as much time to dedicate to Spanish. And also I have a few other priorities that are currently like occupying my time. And there's not really any rush. Ultimately, I just want the exam certificate so I can put it on my wall. Kind of like one of those doctor certificates, you know? I think that would be cool. And so the next section is general thoughts and advice. The first point that I have here is I wish I would have read more consistently after reaching 1,000 hours. It's literally 1,000 hours have passed and I've only done like 320,000 words. And I kept saying that I was going to read consistently and I didn't. I probably could have even started reading at 800 hours in preparation to output because I didn't really have any pronunciation issues. A lot of people say to delay reading to make sure that like you get used to the pronunciation and you don't reinforce like bad habits. But yeah, I probably could have started a little bit earlier. My next point that I've got here is the toughest periods were at the very beginning and 300 to 500 hours. The very beginning, mostly because you can't, like a lot of the content, since it's simplified, isn't necessarily the most interesting, but you know, you just kind of have to grind through it. I remember in the beginning, I was doing like Pomodoro sessions to maintain like maximum focus. So I would sit down for 3 hours, take, you know, in 20-minute sessions and just focus as much as possible. And in the beginning as well, it's normal to feel tired from listening to Spanish. So I would recommend, if you're just starting out, aim for 30 minutes a day, but split it up throughout the day. That'll help prevent that tired feeling and you'll be able to get more time in early on. Another thing that I wish I would have done is do more crosstalk when I got burnt out around that 300 to 500 hour mark. I think I've heard from other people as well that about 300 to 500 hours is when you might tend to get burnt out. It's kind of like you're no longer improving as rapidly as the beginning. And like you're not quite good enough yet to understand the more interesting content. You're kind of really just stuck in that like intermediate dip, but you'll get out of it. You just got to grind through it. But yeah, crosstalk would have totally made things way more interesting. Also, like I did, have zero expectations when speaking for the first time. If you go into it thinking you'll be able to speak a certain way, you're just going to set yourself up for disappointment. So just go into it thinking you're going to suck, and allow yourself to be pleasantly surprised. You will suck in the beginning, you will feel awkward, and you will feel embarrassed. That's just a normal thing, you just got to grind through it, honestly. You will get better. Don't worry. People, especially in the language learning community, understand that, you're practicing, you're just starting out. They're not going to judge you for sucking. So just don't worry about that too much. Also, you will feel like you are somehow regressing at times. I felt this constantly in waves. Again, you just have to keep pushing. You have to consistently practice, get more input, and just work through it, and you will improve. I remember I was watching back my first ever conversation with my 200 hours of conversation practice video, and it was a very big difference. And, it was very nice to put that into perspective. Also, record yourself speaking. Even if you're not going to upload it to YouTube or share it with other people, save it just for yourself at least, so that when you do feel like you are getting worse, you can look back at your previous levels and be like, oh man, I am improving. So that's another pro tip for you guys. Also, waiting to speak does make starting easier. However, it's a grind regardless of when you start. Whether you start at 500 hours of input, 1,000 hours, 1,500 hours, 3,000, the beginning period is just going to suck. But I remember there was this metaphor from Refold. I forget, I always butcher it, but it was essentially something like, think of input as a tennis ball, or like your listening comprehension as a tennis ball, and output as a bowling ball, and they're chained together, right? If you try and lift the bowling ball I have it backwards, I think. But essentially, if you try and lift the tennis ball first, it's going to be really difficult because the bowling ball is weighing it down. But if you lift the bowling ball first, you're going to drag that tennis ball with it. So when you do finally decide to lift the tennis ball, it's going to be a lot easier, right? So that's essentially what waiting to speak does. The longer, or when you wait at least a little bit, it makes outputting easier. Also, do not stress about accent. Pronunciation and fluency are more important. They will make you sound more native than having a good accent, by far. And when I say fluency, I don't mean speaking perfectly without errors and sounding like a native. I just mean speaking without many hesitations or pausing too much, and speaking with confidence. And then pronunciation is super important as well. The only sound that I had to actively kind of double check to make sure I was saying right was the letter D. Because there are two ways to pronounce it in Spanish. There's a soft D and a hard D. And I kind of knew more or less how to pronounce the soft D, but I just kind of watched a quick video on the rule for that. And what the English equivalent would be, and that essentially was oh, okay, I get how it works now. I'm good. And I just actively paid attention to that sound for a little bit, and then it stuck. So much so that when I try and say words in Japanese, I accidentally say them with a Spanish pronunciation most of the time, just because I've gotten used to pronouncing the letter D like that. Also, accent is most influenced, like I said, by the group that you identify with, or the particular region that you identify with. I remember back in the day, I used to play Grand Theft Auto 5 with some British dudes, and I ended up saying garage instead of garage. So stuff like that just happens naturally. Also, I just noticed I'm losing my sunlight here, so I'm going to try and wrap this up. Let's see, the next one. Also, when trying to improve your accent and how you sound, you might feel like you're exaggerating, mocking them, acting, playing a character. That's completely normal. Even though you feel like you're overdoing it, you're probably not. It's going to be actually really hard for you to overdo an accent as a learner. And so that's just kind of that feeling of you trying to break out of that shell and sound more like it. I believe it was Days and Words or something like that. This YouTube channel, the guy learns Swedish and stuff, and he used to study French quite a bit. But I think it was from him. He mentioned that like he like jokingly did like what he thought was a super like stereotypical French accent, and people were like, whoa, like why is your French so much better all of a sudden? Like you sound good, you know? And it's because like we tend to like perceive ourselves as overdoing it when we're really not. So don't worry about that. Just play into it, you know? Also, consistency is king. Do at least a little bit every single day. Even if you don't feel like doing any Spanish at all a particular day, just do a few minutes at least. Also, sleep well, okay? Because sleep is super important to solidifying everything that you're learning. And if you're not sleeping well, you're just kind of like going to be losing gains, so to speak. Also, exercise. Make sure you're active. Make sure you're healthy. I remember, I think there was a study or something that said like you can learn roughly like 20% faster or something if you like actively exercise X amount of time per week. And so don't leave gains on the table. Be healthy. Now we have like a Q&A section. And these are the questions that I mentioned earlier from the Dreaming Spanish Discord. Can you eavesdrop on can I eavesdrop on conversations between natives? I can. It's not as easy as doing it in English, but it is possible. The next question, how did I get my Mexican accent? I focused primarily on Mexican content from 300 hours of input onwards. So that I think was probably like the biggest factor. Also, like I said, like I have Mexican family, so I like identify highly with that particular group. I speak with a lot of Mexican people online. So yeah, those were probably like the three biggest things that I did. But other than that, I didn't do any shadowing. I didn't do any chorusing or like other like accent improvement techniques. I mean, I guess I did do a few hours of chorusing, which is essentially like you get like a few different clips and you just like practice saying those over and over, and then you listen back to your own recording to kind of see how different you sound and where you need to improve compared to the original clip. I did about like 10 hours of that, but I just couldn't really be bothered to do too much more than that, just because it was kind of boring. I would have rather just like gotten more input. The next question, is there anything that still gives me trouble? Definitely. Like I said, there's people out there with stronger accents that you know, are more difficult to understand. Occasionally I'll see a meme or something on YouTube, or I'll have understood the message or like the general idea, but I just missed the individual words just because they were speaking so fast, or it was just really hard to understand them, whether that be for like the audio quality or something else. But yeah, you'll always, or most likely you will always have certain things that still give you a little bit more trouble. What is my overall goal with Spanish? I want my Spanish to be as good as my English, or at least pretty damn close. I don't really have like any strong reasons for that other than I am of the mindset, like I would rather learn less languages to a really high level than a bunch of languages to a lower level. I want to feel comfortable enough to convey my personality as accurately as I can in my other languages. I definitely feel like I struggle a little bit at times to really like be the same in Spanish as I am in English. Just because, you know, sometimes like I'll have something I want to say, but I get stuck. So I have to say it a different way, and it doesn't quite have like the same effect, as like my original, I guess, sentence would have. Also, like I want to be able to make jokes super easily. I do make jokes occasionally in Spanish, but yeah, not nearly as much as I do in English. The next question is, how has learning Spanish affected my identity? I definitely identify a lot more with my Mexican side now. Before I didn't really like feel connected to that part of my family or my identity. But now I'm really proud to be a Spanish speaker. And, you know, I think generally speaking, it's been a good thing for me to learn Spanish. I remember I used to not really like Spanish. I would get irritated listening to it. And I think it's just because like okay, this isn't to talk bad about my mom, but she would always kind of, not speak the best about her experiences in Mexico or with her extended family and stuff like that. And so that kind of rubbed off on me as a kid. But after listening to Spanish for a while, I started to, come to love the language and the people who speak it. So yeah, I think like if there's a language out there that you want to learn, but like you don't really care for how it sounds, you'll probably end up liking how it sounds as long as you just immerse enough. So yeah. Next question. What else is necessary to improve even after 2,000 hours of practice that cannot be achieved through listening and immersion alone? There's probably, like I mentioned earlier, a couple little grammar things that I'm not quite getting 100% when I speak that could probably benefit from light grammar review. We'll see. I mean, I'm curious to see how much reading affects my perception of that idea. I'm going to keep looking for like Spanish grammar stuff to watch it occasionally just in case. That is what would really help. But from what I've heard from other people, reading is going to cover or like help with most of that. Like I remember speaking the other day in the Discord server and they're like, you don't really need to bother with the grammar stuff, grammar textbooks or videos. Just read a lot. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. And the last question here is, are there any topics or subjects that I struggle to talk about or understand? If so, have I done targeted practice like watching content about a certain topic? Generally speaking, no. I'm sure there are certain topics, but I can usually like navigate more or less okay through those topics. Like I'm sure like if you asked me to talk about a like super specific topic that like usually requires like professional vocabulary, I would definitely struggle. But for most topics, I would say I'm fine. And I know I've never done any targeted practice. I just watch what I enjoy. Similarly, like this question reminds me of, I remember watching a video from Stephen Krashen where he was talking about you can learn professional and academic vocabulary from reading fiction. It's not necessary to just read like nonfiction stuff. And that like you will basically like more of those more like, I guess, advanced words pop up than you would think. I hope I'm conveying that accurately, but yeah, from my understanding, it's not really necessary to focus on a certain topic. It might help if you have to like, for example, you need Spanish for your job. Yeah. Watch some content in there. That'll probably speed up the process a little bit, but generally speaking, I don't think it's necessary. But yeah, that was everything, guys. Hopefully you found this breakdown of my Spanish journey incredibly useful. I hope that I covered everything that I possibly could have. If you guys have any questions for me, let me know in the comments. I'd be more than happy to answer them for you guys. But with that being said, if you liked this video and you're interested in following my future progress updates, both with Spanish, Portuguese, and whatever languages I might learn, feel free to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.